We're good. Welcome everybody. Welcome everybody joining us on the live stream. This is season 12, which is really weird to me every time I think about 2013 and being in a writer's workshop and saying to some of the writers, hey, we should start a reading series in the Junction. And we were like, yeah, you should. I was like, okay, all right. But anyway, thankfully, I birthed a child who loves books and voluntarily put themselves at the desk to welcome people, and that's Kaylee. Thank you so much. And we have had many venues over the years, but this is by far the best. Jess, you are the best. Thank you so much. And I am grateful for the pandemic in a strange way, because we now have probably over a dozen people joining us from across Canada as well through the live stream. So welcome to you all. And thank you so much to Catherine Bush, Michelle Winters, and Caitlin Galway. I couldn't have dreamed a better launch to season 12. And I'm grateful for you all coming here and everyone else who's here. I am going to start. I have you breathing. So we open with a land acknowledgement as a reminder that we exist here in a country called Canada because of the colonial actions of the settlers who came before us. Colonialism, occupation, and genocide should not be an acceptable part of our collective histories. Junction Reads exists in what we now call Toronto, which is covered under Treaty 13 and the Williams Treaties. It is the traditional land of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Wyandot, and the Anishinaabe, including the Chippewas and Mississaugas of the Credit. We recognize the continued displacement and colonization of First Nations peoples across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to work in the community on their territory. Reconciliation requires more than this land acknowledgement. We must consistently and mindfully recognize our colonial history and accept the responsibility to care for the land, its resources, and all the people who were here before us. Catherine Bush. I was going to have we were going to have Catherine Bush here last year, and when it got canceled, my heart just went, I'm not going to be able to talk to Catherine Bush about this incredible collection of short stories. Catherine Bush is the author of 5 novels, including the widely acclaimed Blaze Island and The Rules of Engagement, a New York Times notable book. Her books have been shortlisted for the Trillium Prize, City of Toronto Book Award, and Books in Canada First Novel Award. The recipient of numerous fellowships, she was the 2024 Writer-in-Residence Landhaus Fellow at the Rachel Carson Center for Environment and Society in Germany. An associate professor of creative writing at the University of Guelph. She lives in Toronto. Skin is her debut collection of short stories. Catherine, welcome.
Thanks so much, Allison. Is that good? Okay. It's wonderful to be here, and I was glad that we found a date that could work. And it's great to be reading with Michelle and Caitlin, and great to see everybody who's here. So yes, Skin is my first collection of stories after 5 novels, and I'll talk about it more afterwards. I won't say too much at this point. It began as kind of a pandemic project, and the stories in the collection, which I would say touches in various ways on unusual kinds of intimacy, range from the very short to a novella, and range from human interactions to human with the natural world and the natural world. And that's sort of one of the progressions through the collection. So what I'm going to do in my time here tonight is I'm going to read from the opening of the first story, which is the novella in the collection, Benevolence, an East Village story. And then I'm going to end with a very short piece which closes the collection. And I don't think there's anything that you need to know. I think you get as much introduction as you need from the story itself, from Benevolence. Benevolence, an East Village story. Last night, in the small house by the shore of Lake Ontario, where I live now, I was sorting through books, pulling ones I intended to discard from the shelf, when my hands found themselves in front of A Lover's Discourse by Roland Barthes. The 1980s, those were my days of reading Barthes. As my fingers reached out, then riffled through the long unopened pages, something fell to the floor. A small piece of paper, one ragged edge, as if ripped from a notebook. I picked it up. These were the words handwritten on it in a dark looped script. The subject experiences a sentiment of violent compassion with regard to the loved object each time he sees, feels, or knows the loved object is unhappy or in danger. On the reverse, I found this. So let us become a little detached. Let us undertake the apprenticeship of a certain distance. Let the repressed word appear which rises to the lips of every subject once he survives another death. Let us live. The words were Barthes, I was sure of it, just as I was equally convinced that the writing, not mine, belonged to Chris. Chris. I dropped the paper. Even now, after all this time, I recognized his hand. Why now? Why this? If the book had been by my bedside when he vanished from the Ludlow Street apartment in New York City all those years ago, I would have shaken out its pages, hands all over it as if it were a body. If it had been in the stack piled on my desk, I would have done the same. I had shaken so many books as I picked them up, my fingers ransacking them as I zigzagged from room to room in those jagged days after his departure. If he had returned this one to the shelf, I might not have searched it. Surely I would have examined this one. Yet the small rectangle of paper, wedged deep inside, tucked up against the spine, had remained hidden. There was no sign of it above the binding when you pulled the book from the shelf. A note he'd placed there on purpose for me to find, because he assumed I would look as frantically as I did, or a forgotten scrap, words written to and for himself, which made it, nevertheless, a message. September 1987, my first day at the Beverly School, Carroll Gardens, Brooklyn. At the far end of the hallway, I caught sight of a slim boy in an overcoat that belled around him, making him, from a distance, look like a cross between a useful professor and a spy. The girl at his side, taller than he was, dark kinks of hair cascading over her back, bumped against him, the two of them colliding into each other with the absorbed, dreamy, demonstrative theatricality of certain teenage couples. When I entered the staff room, that first morning of my life as a substitute English teacher, anxious and wanting to self-medicate with another cup of coffee, I walked in on talk of how Chris Sianovich, who had spent the previous year living with his grandparents in New Jersey, was now shacked up with his girlfriend, Yasmin Molnar, and her mother in their Fort Greene apartment. The boy in the overcoat. Had I seen him? Maybe the math teacher with his skinny tie and rutted forehead asked that. Yes, I said, because, funnily enough, I just had. What I didn't say was, you mean the beautiful boy. First, the foster family didn't work out, then the grandparents. We'll see how long this lasts, muttered the Latin teacher, waist cinched with a Hawaii belt, snapping across the floor in her high-heeled shoes. You've met the mother. Give him a chance. Let's say this was the biology teacher, hunched over her coffee mug, sheets of paper spread across her knees. I barely knew these people. We'd met for introductions. It was a small school, private. Everyone on staff knew who Chris was. The school had lost its English teacher at the last minute due to pregnancy complications. The art teacher, Celia Hahn, knew my husband, and perhaps because he'd occasionally taught college art history, had reached out to him. From the south of France, where he had moved 2 years before, he'd called to tell me about the job. In those days, I was barely making ends meet by temping, legal proofreader, receptionist. As far away as he was, my husband had perhaps intuited my fragile financial state. When he wanted, he had keen powers of perception, empathy, even generosity. And since I lived in what was still essentially his apartment, subletting it, he had a vested interest in seeing me employed, his on-paper wife, the Canadian with the Ivy League degree in New York on a green card that I owed to him. 12th grade English was to be my last class of the day. 15 minutes before it was due to begin, I entered the staff bathroom and in my lace-up boots and vintage dress, splashed water over my face, trying to still my 29-year-old manically beating heart. I was an actor performing the part of a teacher. I made it thus far, corralled the sea of hormones of the 12-year-olds, spoken of passion to the 15-year-olds. No one had yelled at me. In another part of my life, I told solo stories on stage about a woman who knits gargantuan sweaters for possible lovers, a woman who calls the numbers on lost pet posters, another about an artist who takes in a tuna fish tasting session in Midtown for money, a thing I had actually done while looking for love among the tasters. 5 years before, I'd been the star of a downtown movie, an underground hit. At 18, I'd crossed an international border and arrived at Yale knowing no one, imitating the dress codes of others, changing outfits by the day, slipping between them because I had no idea who I was. All I'd known upon arrival in New Haven was that I wanted to put a country between myself and the particular family dysfunction that seemed the cause of my unhappiness, and remove myself from a romantic relationship I didn't know how to leave. You're lucky, I told myself then, as I had when the film made such a splash. And I repeated the words to myself in the staff bathroom of the Beverly School. That I had been hired at all seemed a fluke. I'd only taught theater in summer camps. Yes, I had the English degree from Yale. In college, I played Nina in The Seagull, the ingenue, it goes without saying, to a ripple of success. I told the principal I had always wanted to teach. They were desperate. I was broke and available. And Celia Hahn vouched for me. Luck, I told myself, took many forms. In the staff bathroom, I patted my face dry, adjusted my makeup, set off down the hall. When I entered the classroom, quiet resounded because no one was there. I waited, checked my schedule, frightened that word got out about my newness, my substituteness. After 10 minutes, I headed to the office, ready to admit defeat, only to discover the scheduling glitch, so that when I entered the actual classroom, late, the air was raucous and a few had already left. I felt them pheromonally, their judgment, their raging insecurity meeting mine. All I had to do, I told myself, was hold their attention. In other words, perform for my life. At the back of the class, beside the tall windows, Kristianovich and Yasmin Molnar laid their heads together. Yasmin picked up a pen. Chris mimicked the gesture. With limpid curiosity, his gaze met mine. I apologized for my lateness. I wrote my name on the blackboard. Hello, I said. I'm Miss Larson. So that's the opening of Benevolence, which opens the collection. And now I'm going to go to the end and read the final piece, which is kind of an interesting, I think they make an interesting pairing. I've never tried to read them together before, so it's kind of fun for me to do this. So this is called In the Park, the Great Horned Owl Summons His Mate. And it's set just down the road in that park we all know, Hyde Park. Below, as darkness grows, rabbits leap over melting snow. I call. A spray of pellets skitters. Bulls crackle dead leaves as they pass. The ones blued by little fires held close to their chests stumble out of the woods into their land of lights. Later, in darkness, Coyote, scruffy emperor of the forest, and his limping queen bolt out of the trees, through the park gates, paddle on the hard tracks. A rustle of bodies reaches my ears, scream of a creature, catguts ripping. You, I call, and again, you. Soon you will come, perch high on a pine branch. As you exhale, the feathers at your throat will flutter, mottle, flicker, swerve of neck, twitch of feathered horn, burn of yellow eye will fix me as, from branch to branch, we speak to each other. You, yes, you, yes, you. For so long we have done this. The sun turns, fades, returns. How can one who was here be not here? I call again. I listen. The screech owls stir in their hollow branches. Chipmunks, tucked in their burrows, quiver. Fox sniffs and lifts a paw. Beavers in their stick house chew the greenwood. Sap runs, a soft gush. All day, the bright-eyed hunters soar, talons flexing. Higher than birds, a flash of flint circles with a great groan. At night, in this aged forest, ghosts cross paths with the living. Beyond the spell of the gnarled oaks, blinding lights roar along black ribbons. Free of ice, the creek trickles. The queen and her emperor are digging a den for their young. Where are you? Dogs ransack the woods. Again, the trees turn into silhouettes. The vast lake, out beyond the blaze of racing lights, gurgles and lisps. How can I be here without my other? Alone, I wait in this high pine amid the rustle of needle and creak of wood. If I call into the space where you were, into the silence that expands into absence, will you hear? With my call, I draw you close, conjure you to return, cross time, out of the ether, out of the earth. Thank you.
Thank you so much. These stories in Skin are so uniquely voiced and structured, and yet emotionally cohesive. That's not the best word, but thank you so much for sharing that. Sorry. It's just because you can't hear a thing on the live stream. Caitlin, Galway, thank you so much for joining us. Nobody knows how excited I get when someone sends me an email with their short story collection, and my answer is yes. Doesn't matter. Yes, yes. I'm so excited. Caitlin Galway is the author of 2 novels. Bonavera Howl was a spring pick by the Globe and Mail and called Striking and Evocative and a Truly Singular Reading Experience by Room Magazine. Her first book, a novella called Blackbird, was a finalist for Glimmer Train's 2010 fiction open contest. When authors send me 3 line biographies, I go, no. There's more here. Her short fiction has appeared in Best Canadian Stories 2025 event, The Ex-Puritan, House of Anansies, The Broken Social Scene Story Project. Very cool. Anthology, Exile Editions, and Gloria Vanderbilt's Carter V. Cooper short fiction anthology. Her work has been recognized by CBC Books as the winner of the 2011 Stranger Than Fiction contest, the 2020 Morton Prize, and by Riddle Fence in the 2011 short story contest. A Song for Wildcats, her new short story collection, is only 5 months old, and it is already widely acclaimed. Caitlin, welcome.
Thank you so much. There's some familiar faces here. Thanks, guys. Sorry if you've heard me read these sections a million times because I stick to the same two ones, I think. I think they represent the collection pretty well. So I'm going to be reading just two short excerpts from two of the stories. The first one is called Heat Stroke, and it's probably the most experimental of the collection, but I don't think it's hard to follow or anything. It's a surrealist exploration of identity fragmentation in the wake of trauma. And so you have this girl named Fiona, 18-year-old named Fiona, who's woken up in the Mojave Desert with no recollection of the past few days. She drives to a motel in Vegas where she holds up and just tries to make sense of what's happened and piece it together. But every night she has the same looping dream, just repeats itself again and again. And there's this doppelganger, known only as M, who is trying to communicate something to her, but it's too vague, it's too surreal, she can't quite grasp it. In this scene, Fiona thinks that maybe this doppelganger named M is trying to communicate to her or with her in the real world. Okay. The owner of the motel never seemed to unplug herself from the network of hanging keys behind her. A broad wall of multi-dimensional connectivity, like an old telephone switchboard. Fiona scanned the keys, each one able to unlock a portal into someone's fitful world. She had received an unexpected call from the lobby, some business about a letter. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's for you, the motel owner said, looking slightly confused as she handed over an envelope. Fiona Moss? When Fiona nodded, the motel owner clicked her nails on the counter, her eyebrows pulled together. Was it your sister or something? What do you mean? Fiona asked. Your sister bringing the envelope. My sister? Not in Vegas, no, she's 14. She just looked cleaner, chattier, less blood flushed in the eyes, Fiona thought. She just looked an awful lot like you. Fiona felt an eerie omnipresence. Was the letter from M? How could that be? She scanned the lobby's dimpled ceiling, the vacant cherry vinyl chairs, the magazine rack neatly stocked. It's kind of like, what was that episode? Fiona pressed the heels of her palms against her eyes. In the blotchy darkness, she saw herself huddled with her sister on the sofa, their faces a weird embryo pale in the glow of the twilight zone. Watching as poor Millicent Barnes, once a sensible girl, is tormented by the sudden appearance of her doppelganger in a bus depot. Honey, are you okay? The motel owner touched Fiona's hand, startling her. You seem a little young to be on your own out here. Are you meeting friends? Family? No, I'm here for... Fiona's thoughts nodded. What could she say? A small white statuette of the Virgin Mary stood on the counter by the window. Its reflection in the glass, cast in the ceiling's fluorescence, appeared superimposed onto the scene outside. An attentive presence watching over the cars in the parking lot. I'm here because, was it the light? Yes, a moth-like longing for the light had drawn her here. A lifelong reliance on the stars, or whatever light was most at hand for comfort, navigation. But how can one say, I came here to curl up in the city's manic radiance? How does one explain that if one could not burrow into the space between the stars, hold oneself in place with the pins of Orion, then Vegas would have to do? an electric star cluster within driving distance. Okay, so that's the first story, or the first excerpt. The second one is from the title story, Song for Wild Cats. And so you don't have to have read anything by Plato to understand this, but it was sort of my response to reading the Symposium by Plato. If anybody who knows me, that one there, has heard me talk about this for like 3 years. I loved the Symposium by Plato, like borderline too much. I loved it. I thought it was the coolest thing, and it gave so much shape to ideas that had lived inside me for a long time. And I wanted to write a story where I guess that essence was in the story in some way, even if it wasn't, like, it's not a textbook and it's not about the symposium, but I wanted the essence of it to be present in the story. And so it is a story about these two young men in 1968 in France during the student revolts. And the narrator is potentially falling in love, but the ability for this relationship to become what it could be, he has to move past this fixation that he has on a metaphysical definition of love, very fixated on what is love, what is violence, what is love in relation to violence, can they be separated? And so just obsessing, kind of like how I obsessed over it. So it found its way into a story. And in this scene, Alfie, the narrator, has woken up next to Felix, who's the friend he's in love with, and he kind of vaguely remembers the previous night where they just got really drunk and they talked philosophy and they talked life. And Alfie's previous relationship, which was a violent one, has sort of broken the surface, and as the readers become aware of it, Felix is becoming aware of it, and it's just sort of Alfie reckoning with the night before. Turning onto my side, I found Felix lying beside me. I fell stone still. He was asleep, serene in my disheveled cardigan, squeezing my hand to his chest. How had this happened? I scanned the room, vaguely sequencing the previous night. A quivery nervousness set in. What had I told him? Had he meant to fall asleep here, or would he be mortified to find himself in my bed? My chest lay thin and damp over my heartbeat, my breaths so shallow I thought I might faint. And then he murmured, still asleep. I looked at him curled so soundly, clutching my hand. The freckle by his mouth burned my retina, like the fine point fire of sunlight through a magnifying glass. An aching tenderness cracked open inside me. His beauty appeared almost separate from him, a pure essence existing in the interplay between us, between his goodness and my cherishing of his goodness. I had never before desired to watch someone sleep. The path connecting me to other people had been shrouded, winding. Yet I watched him sleep as one watches a river or a rare bird. I reached out to stroke the hair from his face and started at myself. He could not possibly have intended to sleep next to me. We had passed out in wine-headed exhaustion, and he had searched for my hand in the night as he dreamed of someone else. Perhaps it was pity, too, for the onset of my strobing memories, or guilt after prying into the affair, its unspoken strangeness always lurking on the leeward side of my mind. I slipped my hand free. Moving to the creaky wicker chair in the corner, I sank into myself and waited for the distance to accumulate, for the floor to stretch into separate hemispheres. It did not. The easy tide of Felix's breathing carried across the few feet between us. I leaned forward in the chair, sitting at the edge. My hand, so recently nestled in solace, tingled with absence. I traced my palm as though he had left etchings of his prints. What if I was wrong, and it had been my anchorage he sought in the drift of sleep? What if desire could flourish bloodlessly, without suffering or defacement? The sky floated high in the window, clouds swept a milky blue. I stood and lifted the sash higher, then dipped my head into the clean morning air. I looked back at Felix resting peacefully in my sheets. The breeze woke my skin, tasting of sea mist and salt. The waves hushed along the harbor, and in them I could hear a hidden language calling to me in tumbling whispers I could almost understand. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for the symposium. I wouldn't have thought of it. No, I have to read symposium.
I think if you read it and then you read the story, you kind of like, oh, I get it.
Yeah.
You don't need to have read it.
No, now I want to read it
Yeah.
because that's,
Please.
yeah.
Not that he needs like my help getting his work out there, but like, yeah.
Thank you so much. Michelle Winters, again, thank you so much. We had a bunch of schedule moves, and I'm so grateful that we were able to have you in person. Michelle Winters is a writer, painter, and translator, born and raised in St. John, New Brunswick, currently living in Toronto. An incredibly diverse artist, Winters has written and performed in a couple of plays, which she also co-produced. Her short fiction has been published in literary magazines such as This Magazine, Tattle Creek, and Dragnet. Her debut novel, I Am a Truck, was shortlisted for the 2017 Giller Prize. She is the translator of Kiss the Undertow and Danil and Vanya by Marie-Hélène La Rochelle. Michelle, welcome.
Thank you. And thank you for everybody for coming out to a bookstore on a Sunday night to watch people or listen to people read to you. That's amazing. As a human activity, I think it's a special one. We can't lose that one. I'll be reading to you from Hair for Men, the story of a young woman growing up in Toronto with a very particular relationship with men. Her name is Louise. In this part, she's 16. She's just been through a trauma at the hands of a couple of boys at her high school, and has magically, the way that music sometimes shows up at the right time, has magically discovered hardcore punk at the same time as a means of handling her feelings. And here she's going to her first bunch of fucking goofs show at Sneaky Dee's. With no clue what to expect, I headed downtown, trying not to feel too weird about walking into a show alone. The pitch black upstairs bar took care of that. I found an unoccupied bit of wall far enough from a couple making out and looked around for Marco or Flem. I didn't see them, but the band was just about to go on and everyone was pushing toward the stage. I liked my spot, so I hung back. The lead singer, Crazy Steve Goof, started the show by chugging a can of Molson X and crushing it against his head. I felt my blood start to vibrate. The band attacked without mercy. A guy on stage was spitting fire. I stopped watching and joined the surge, closing my eyes and letting my brain ride the noise. My head fell into the rhythm and bobbed along, louder and madder. I wanted more. Up near the stage, kids were thrashing. Every so often, a body would fly over the top of the crowd in a flurry of fists and boots. I edged my way down to the speakers to get a better look. A guy got thrown out of the crowd and barreled right into me, the impact sending a glow through my cells like the spreading bruise. Awash with adrenaline, I pushed him as hard as I could back into the crowd. I got kicked off my feet and shucked onto a couple of guys, one of whom I elbowed in the nose. He and I looked at each other as a trickle of blood escaped his nostril. He poked his tongue out and tasted the blood on his lip, then bellowed at me, the tendons in his neck stretched tight. I bellowed back. I got a fist in the ear and landed on the floor just outside the pit. The guy reached his hand out and helped me up. Then once I was standing, he rammed his shoulder against mine, knocking me back into the pit. I came out of that night with bruises all over my ribs and the back of both shirt sleeves torn, but I'll tell you, it felt good to hit and to get hit. Talk about next phases of maturity. At last, my body was good for something. It's probably the saddest line I've ever written. I started going to shows every chance I got. Hanging around hollers, I got first word about every new band and every show coming to town. And while the shows were good, for me, it was all about the pit. I'd wade in like a swimmer, close my eyes, and respond naturally to the shock of human touch. I decided I was straight edge like Henry Rollins. No drugs, no booze. Of course, I was only 16, so it wasn't exactly a choice, but it gave me a slight advantage. At my first Dayglow abortions show, I was hanging out by the wall close to 2 drunk guys and a very drunk girl. All of a sudden, the girl leaned over and threw up at her feet, then slid to the floor into her vomit. The guys roared noiselessly in the chaos, pointing and laughing as she sat there slumped over, cross-legged, her kilt lifted to reveal the ripped crotch of her tights. Still laughing, they headed for the pit, one joyously headbutting the other on the way. I took a last look at the girl sprawled out in the bit of space people were making for her and followed them. I only went after the bad ones. The rest of my joy in the pit came from the mutual violence cooked into the culture. It was an umbrella under which I could hurt and be hurt. I hit my own self less. Although the shows brought some release, seeing Mitch and Spence thriving every day at school left me with a reserve of anger that, for want of another available target, I took out on my parents. I slammed doors and punched walls and stomped up and down the house, creating a tension I maliciously controlled, cranking it up whenever I wanted, just to see them react. Hurting my mother was easy because I'd gotten a head start, and her day drinking was low-hanging fruit. With my dad, I weaponized our closeness, but my abuse had the unexpected result of pushing them closer as a couple. With a shared foe to battle, they started investing in their relationship, becoming friends rather than passive-aggressive adversaries. By the time my 17th birthday rolled around, the sad little pizza party they threw me felt more like a date of theirs I'd invaded for all their cuddling. I brayed at the kitchen table about how I'd already filled out my Hair Academy application and only had to wait until I'd completed my high school diploma to send it in, making quite a show of how I wouldn't need them anymore and couldn't wait to be free of their bullshit. And if I was eager to be free of them, imagine how I longed for a moment's reprieve for me. I came home one night to find them waiting up. I'd just been to a Subhumans show in a warehouse near the abattoir, and I walked in with a split lip and the reek of all the beer I'd knocked out of people's hands. My ears were ringing and my knuckles were swollen, and there were a couple of idiots who wouldn't be calling me a dyke again anytime soon. "Louise, this can't go on. Look at you," said my mother, her brow a capital M. "Are you bleeding? Why does it have to be bad, Mom? Why can't this just be me? Why do I have to be the person you want me to be? Is it you? Yes, I've never been happier." She pursed her lips. "Have another glass of wine, Mom. I'm going to bed." "Louise, don't talk to your mother that way." "Oh, so you're taking her side now." "We both love you and we're both very worried about you." "You wouldn't be so worried if you'd gotten the boy you wanted, would you?" "What? Why else would you make me wear boy clothes and do boy stuff?" I wasn't even convincing myself. I just wanted so badly to fight. My dad slapped his hands on his thighs. "That's what you like." Exhausted, I turned down the hallway, flicking the family portraits on my way, sending them one by one to the floor. "Louise, what? Your mother and I are going on a trip." I slunk back up the hallway to give them a good long glare. "Without me." "Oh, so you'd like to come to Cape Breton with us?" No. "No, we didn't think so." "Well, you're old enough to stay by yourself, so we thought we'd give you the chance to show some responsibility." "Boy, you must be pretty worried about me if you're leaving me here alone. That makes sense." "Do you think you can handle it?" "Of course I can. It'll be nice not to have you breathing down my neck for once." On my bed, I tucked my knees to my chin, still wearing my beer-stinking coat. The terrorized townsfolk were fleeing the ogre. As much as calm reflection clashed with my new way of being, I had to stop and wonder if all this was necessary. Melting down felt warranted every time they asked whether I'd eaten or where I was going, but deep down I knew how thin a mask this still was for my still raw feelings about a certain carefree teenage boy, and I craved cheap relief. As for the teenage boy himself, I took no action at all, in spite of my prurient fantasies of feeding his penis into a meat grinder. I wasn't going to the principal. My parents would find out for sure then. And the police? It would certainly be the funniest report they'd received that day. No, the abscess was mine to gestate, and it festered, ever swelling, pushing against my rib cage like an extra heart. Thank you. The
compactness in which the absolute heartbreak happens following these pages is incredible. It's just full of so much rage and so much pain, and I loved every minute of it. Thank you so much for sharing. Caitlin, Catherine, if you could join.
One of these days, I'm going to trip and fall. Don't do that. Well, not today.
Is that good, Kaylee? I was worried that I didn't set up the chairs properly. Thank you all so much. So as I mentioned, and sorry to everybody that I mention it almost every single time we're here, I want to talk about short stories. Michelle, you're going to wonder why I'm going to talk about short stories and what I'm going to ask you, but Hair for Men is pretty concise. It's just over 50,000 words. But I also read a short story of yours called The Dam, which is only 1,000 words, or just a little over 1,000 words, and does the thing that I love most about short stories, which is it exists almost entirely outside of the story, even though there is sleepwalking and a beaver dam and lots of things happening. The tension, I think, exists beyond the story. So I would like to ask you to talk about how stories exist for you and how much exists within the story and how much exists without it.
Oh my gosh.
Or what you leave out deliberately. Like you had mentioned in an interview how much of the Tragically Hip exist in the story as Easter eggs. I think you described them. But what was left out of Hair for Men?
Anything that didn't specifically come from Louise and her intentions and her. I was researching and I read a ton of like men's books. I read like Fight Club and all of this stuff, and I met with a friend of mine and I said, look at this stack of books that I'm researching. And he said, isn't it funny how much research you do and how little of it ends up going into what you're writing? Right. So yeah, I was super informed, but I was so focused on Louise that, yeah, if it didn't exist in her world, then it wasn't included, I guess. It's the same.
Catherine, I think if anybody had to name 20 Canadian novelists, I think you would 100% be in the top 20. I am probably not the only one who thought Catherine Bush wrote a collection of short stories, everybody, when Skin came out. And so I've heard you talk about your collaboration with Andre Alexis, but I want to talk about how you came to the decision to put a collection together.
Okay. Yeah, so the stories in Skin, some of them are very recent and some of them are older work and that I went over lightly, and a couple like Benevolence and there's another story, Camouflage, come from much older ideas that during the pandemic when I couldn't start a new novel, I've always loved stories, but I guess I've been strongly drawn to the novel, and now I had this pool of time, as so many of us did, and I had already started writing flash fiction, and so I kept going back there. But then I just was, I don't know, doing some searching around in the archives and came across these two older stories that are so old that they're typescripts, like they were just before I was putting things on a computer. And I don't generally have an impulse to go back to older work like that, but given that moment, and there was something about them that still really interested me. And I thought, they're still alive somehow. And to go back to them now means utterly transforming them. And that was interesting, to have a kind of conversation with my younger writer self. And so that's sort of what happened. And then I had new story ideas. And I think there was just, it was a pleasure to try something new at different lengths. And I think the pandemic had a lot to do with that. And I love setting new challenges for myself. And then late in the project, Andre, Alexis, and I often trade work, and we edit each other's work and each other's stories. And so he had already edited a couple of the stories in the collection just informally as I read his stories. And he said that he wanted to make it a collection and he wanted to edit it. And I said that would be wonderful. So Goose Lane, my publisher, was fabulous about bringing Andre on board as an editor. And so so then we created a collection, had to think about how to order a very disparate collection, which is very short pieces and longer, like there's the very long novella and then a couple of other novellas. And so that became an interesting challenge. And I feel like we found a journey, something that feels whole. So it doesn't make a novel out of it, but I like the fact that if you read the stories in order, you do get a sense of journeying through time, but also through a span of relationships, certain things like viruses and different kinds of touch and birds keep recurring through the collection and ring like bells and look different ways. And so that was very satisfying to me.
There is definitely an emotional connection, like connective tissue, I guess, that runs through the collection. Thank you for that. Caitlin, the 5 stories in A Song for Wildcats are quite long. And as a person who loves short stories, the first thing that popped into my head was how, because at the end we find that some of these were published in literary magazines. And I thought, how did you get these published? How did you come to the point and go, oh my gosh, this is so long. Who is going to publish this for me? And did that make you think, okay, I'm going to have to either turn this into a novella or turn it into a 1,000-word short story?
Yeah, I've had so much trouble with that. I've had quite a number of stories, not even ones from this collection, but from just like my entire writing career, where it's just been too long. Even if like a place doesn't have a specific word count, the communication has always been, it's way too long. It's way too long, even if someone loved it. I remember there was a story that was, there was a publisher in the States, really amazing. Would have been like the dream come true to be in them, but they told my agent at the time, like, we really love it, and we're like this close, but it's 5 pages. So, like, no, it was heartbreaking. It was the New Yorker. It was like, oh, but I was like, I've already trimmed it down from like 60, and at this point, it's not what it is anymore. So that haunts me. But sometimes it's a matter of stories starting out shorter than it, like the Library Spell is the longest story in the collection. It's a full-blown novella. It's about 70 pages or so. But it started out as a much shorter story that got trimmed down. This one here again, she trimmed it down. She took the hacksaw to it and trimmed it down to get it to a word count where I can start spinning it. But the story wasn't done. There was too much elasticity to it. Like for me emotionally, I was like, there's more to this. There's more to this story. There's more to these characters for me. So I just kept pulling and pulling, and it became a novella. But at that point, an excerpt at that point had already been published. So I was like, well, the novella is never going to be published independently. But it has already found a home in a way, so I can do with it what I please. And then other ones, I didn't even try. Like The Islanders is about 65 pages. So I'm not going to try to put that in the Malahat Review. Like, even though they're wonderful, like they're not going to take Something.
the Bell podcast, though.
Oh, that's true. That's true. It was done so close to the whole book being done that it was like, but Heat Stroke is the only one that I think is a close to a traditional length because it's about 20 pages. So that found a home, but I didn't really try for the other ones. I didn't even bother. I'm like, there's nowhere for a 40-page story to go for the most part, especially in they're like a literary journal where they are trying to put in as many people as they can and have like a really great variety for the reader.
Yeah.
And if they give a 50-page short story too much room, that just shoves everybody else out. So I did get it. But yeah, no, it's a source of enormous frustration for me. To be honest.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
I get rejected for brevity sometimes.
Ooh.
Yeah, I can't make that 3,500 words. And like, yeah, the
jam
only
was so.
well, it was a model that I was trying to use because the only time that I've ever been asked to write a short story, they said, give us 1,000 words. And I was like, challenge accepted.
Yeah.
And then the next story that I wrote, I was like, let's see if I can do that 1,000-word thing. And I see if it's a 1,000-word story. And then I'm like, all right, we'll expand if necessary, maybe give it 1,200 or whatever. But
What's the average length of short stories that you published in literary magazines?
1,200.
Yeah.
It's really like, I love to just get the essential out there. It's a delight for me. It's a delightful exercise to just like put down, condense, and just put down absolutely the bare essential and see if you can do that while making it emotionally resonant and all that stuff.
Yeah. Because even as novels, I Am a Truck and Hair for Men are quite short. So yeah. I mean, I'm like 5,000 words or 50,000 words. It's like my dream. Or sorry, Kevin, or 130,000 words. Thank you so much for that. I'm gonna jump off of that. No, I'm not going to because you answered the question, each of you, in a way. We were talking earlier about how books kind of come together magically, even though Heather, Kaylee, and I have sort of limited our curation style in the last couple of years because of scheduling and all that kind of stuff. But it's incredible how much these stories have in common. I want to talk about loss and how it's depicted in each of your books. Many of your characters experience great loss, in some cases, the greatest, losing parents as a young kid. Sorry. So I always feel bad when I don't double print, but then I double print and I'm like, where the heck am I? Or whether it's an assault and a loss of oneself. Or a loss of an opportunity, as maybe with Chris in Benevolence, each of your characters sort of sidestep that loss in a way. They move on, they go on with their lives, and it's, even though it's inside of them, as a reader, we know it's inside of them. The characters somehow just sort of step aside from that incredible loss and move forward. And I want to talk to you about that, the depiction of loss and how you work with it in fiction and with your characters.
Well, in Louise's case, I was particularly thinking about, like, what if you lost your parents when you were at your absolute worst? Like, when that was all you had to remember was what a jerk you were to them. And her, everything that she has been learning about how to be, and she's very, like, if it's feminine, if it's remotely emotional, she rejects it. So she has no way of processing that grief. So she plugs it all into the wrong places and just like causing pain to herself and causing pain to other people. And like, yeah, it's basically an exercise in the worst imaginable way to deal with loss. Yeah, it's never addressed, and she's searching for a solution for the rest of her days.
Just want to get that out from between your legs.
Yeah.
Yeah, loss in skin. Well, from the two pieces that I read, you can see how it's thematized in different ways with the great horned owl, who was based on an actual great horned owl who lost his mate in Hyde Park and who would, cry all day, all night. And the owls are not supposed to cry all day. And I don't know whether he was suffering heartbreak or not, but there was an absence. There was another owl that should have been there that wasn't there. And I wanted to enter that. Like that was the challenge, to enter the voice of an owl. I can't make a real owl, but can I convey something of owlness and of that loss through owlness? And then Ellen, who's the narrator of Benevolence, that I read the opening of. It's narrated, as you can tell, retrospectively. So she's in middle age, looking back on this time of her life. And interestingly, one of the sources for Benevolence is Herman Melville's Bartleby the Scrivener, if any of you know that. And what interested me about that is the relationship between the lawyer and Bartleby, who moves into his office and refuses to leave. And the lawyer is trying to do the best thing. Like he's really irritated, but he's trying in some way to be good. He's really imperfect. And I was interested in that energy of trying to be kind, trying to be good, being misguided, not really being able to see your own desires in the case of Ellen. But the story is also set at the time of AIDS, and that is a presence in the story. Ellen's part of a world where people are dying all the time, and the world itself that she inhabits, this world of performance and theater in the East Village of New York in the 80s, is slowly being lost. And so there's, her relationship with Chris exists within this, and she introduces him to people who, may or may not have his best interests in mind. And so she has to reckon with her own complicity, where guilt meets kindness while trying to pad over desire. So it all gets very complicated, and she's haunted by what she might have done while not seeing what she did, if that makes any sense. And so I wanted the story to go to unexpected places. It may look from this opening like a certain kind of relationship, but I wanted to open it up and open up the losses in the story too.
Thank you. So yeah, I thought about thinking about this, and so my characters sidestep loss and grief and everything, partially because they don't recognize that it exists. And that started out a little bit unintentional because that is how I function. And then when I was writing the collection, I started going to therapy. and then I started noticing it in the stores, and I'm like, uh-oh. I'm like, okay, everybody here is dealing with this without, they're not dealing with it in the way that I thought of it was. And I started to see, then you lean into it, then you fine tune it, you make it kind of like work with the structure of the story. But the way I saw it was every character exists in a metaphorical burning house, has always lived in a burned house. I grew up in a constantly burning house. And if the house is in a state of a raging fire, you don't think, oh, I'm sad, or I think I should tell my parents that this is happening to me, or I'm hurt, or I think I have to talk to a doctor, or something like that. And even if you do, even if you're like, you know what, the fire's been going on for a long time, I'm going to tell them something happened. They don't care because the house is burning, or they can't care or hear it the way that they would otherwise hear it because the house is burned. So there's this constant state of sorry, like I got a little bit of a scratchy throat, and I'm not sick. Yeah, they've got this constant state of crisis, and so because they were always existing in that place, even those who were outside of it, and most of them are still kind of in it, but even the ones who are outside of it, like the aunt character, Lydia, she's not in that place anymore, but she's never understood the seriousness of her situation. And some of them are too young, like the little boy really doesn't get it at all, but he's always lived in the burning house. And so part of the journey for all the characters is starting to just get to like the point of realizing that they have grief at all, or that something that happened was traumatic, and that that's sort of what's led them to the state that they're in, or the dangerous situations that they keep finding themselves in. And so it's not so much, it's, I think it's like, it's even more severe than a choice to put off dealing with the grief. They haven't even gotten to the point where they like, where they see it. I think that one character is the one who's closest to understanding her grief. And that would be the one from The Wisp, where she kind of sees it as grief, but she again doesn't recognize really what, like the severity of her situation. And she actively chooses to sort of be like, I don't want to deal with this. But even that, like, yeah, it's just like, it's not even a choice for most of them. They just don't get it. Like Alfie in the A Song for Wildcats, the excerpt that I read, he doesn't even understand that what he experienced was an abusive relationship, partially because it's same sex and those tend to be dismissed. But he doesn't even get it. And that's his first problem. His first issue is like, I can't even begin to recover from domestic violence because I don't understand what it was. Yeah. It's just like, you know, completely like glazed over in that sense.
I feel like Alfie and Louise could have a really great conversation.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you so much. So I added this, it wasn't in the questions that I sent, because Catherine had a great conversation with KJILO, who has a podcast, The Book Hook. I strongly recommend everybody listen to it, support it. And it was, you were talking about intimacy, which again, as soon as I heard you say that, I thought, oh my gosh, this is incredible. There's a great character in Here for Men, Grace, who is not afraid of intimacy, almost the opposite of Louise in so many ways. And so I wanted to talk to each of you about that. The intimacy of rage in Here for Men is incredible. Like just the fearless way that Louise abuses her body, which is, you know, a horrible thing to say, but there's an intimacy in how you portray that. And Catherine, everything you've said about like skin and the character washing the feet, like there's just I'm going to go on and not make any sense, which is how I end every question that I ask. So let's talk about intimacy if we can.
I set out to write a book about a woman who loves men. You know, like that was, I thought when I got the idea, it was like, I don't think anybody's ever written that. So I needed to create a construct where intimacy of like the absolute fruitiest, most delightful kind was possible. And I was like, how do you construct that? Well, it depends on her, it depends on them, it depends on how is it the most perfect so that they can everybody's able to just let down their barriers and be warm with each other. And it was an exercise in empathy and intimacy from the very, trying to just create a perfect world in the most absurdly like funny way. Anyway, and then there's Louise's relationship with her father, like, and with the Commodore. She has all kinds of intimacy. It actually, the intimacy of her violence, I would almost say is as close, is as passionate, but just, you know, desperately unhealthy, but intensely necessary. I think that's why why violence works for her as something that puts her in touch with herself.
Yeah, intimacy. I was deeply interested in intimacy writing skin. The title gives that away. And I was interested in going to places where the intimacy and the touch is not expected. So even in the ambivalence between Ellen and Chris, there's an obvious kind of transgression that, you know, readers might expect in this story. And I really wanted to subvert those expectations and yet make their encounters really charged. So in fact, the reader ends up wanting something to happen that they shouldn't want to have happen, and put the reader in that position, which seemed it was also interesting to me. And then Allison mentioned the title story Skin, which is about a woman who begins religiously and then more altruistically to wash the feet of strangers. She ends up washing the feet of refugees in Toronto. Interestingly, I just heard the new female Archbishop of Canterbury, I guess, and talk about how important washing others' feet was to her as a, you know, an altruistic Christian practice. And I thought, oh, that's kind of cool. That was one of the first things that she spoke about when she, you know, in her first interview. So that was cool to me. And elsewhere in the collection of two of the final longer stories, a man who begins as a marine biologist ends up having this intense relationship with extreme wind events. He pursues them and pursues them not quite like a conventional storm chaser, but out of a kind of love, like almost a sort of sexual desire to get close to them, to pay attention to them, while trying to figure out what do we do? How do we live now in an era of extreme weather events? How can we respond not with shock, grief, rage? What else is open to us? And so again, I was interested in pursuing that as a question of intimacy. And in Glacial, the story that follows that one, this woman has a kind of kinky encounter with a glacier. And I won't tell you what happens in that, but again, like the character, I got shut up in a hut on Svalbard in the Arctic in the far north. And what happened to me is somewhat different than what happened to her, but it's got the same starting place. And there's also a story in the collection, Roxanne, which is my reworking of Cyrano de Bergerac, Edmond de Rostan's Cyrano de Bergerac, and from Roxanne's point of view. And again, I was interested in the charged intimacy between Cyrano and Roxanne, in which they almost never touch. And yet there's something really erotic, nevertheless, that's possible. And so I wanted to go, those kind of unusual places are what fascinate me as a writer.
You're in the Arctic?
Oh yeah. Yes, I was. Yeah.
Just that person to go. It's amazing. Intimacy. Okay, so intimacy in these stories is much more present than I was even aware. It was only kind of looking back after I read them, and I heard comments from people who had read them, like the beta read everything, about like this just profound like desire for intimacy and this yearning for intimacy, and this like overwhelming love for like a specific person, to the point of like destructive love or obsessive love or something like that. And I was like, interesting. Okay, cool. Because I always thought all the characters are a little bit reserved and kind of like borderline frigid, but that's the way they see themselves. And I'm like, I don't think anyone else is seeing them that way. And that's part of it. That's the way they see themselves. And I think that intimacy, like I look at the collection, you know, now and I go everywhere, but it's not so much the achieving of intimacy, so much as this battle between a desire for it and a complete resistance to it. Alfie is a really good example because he is clearly like desperately in love with his friend Felix, but can't get over this idea that love and intimacy and desire are inherently destructive, and they can't be free of destruction, even if they start out healthy. And so for him, he's like, I don't want to be intimate with this person in any way, because that will not only destroy me, but I love them, it will destroy them eventually too. And it's kind of like that for all of the characters in some capacity. There is this friction between like the beauty of intimacy and the destruction of it, which I don't think is completely unfair, especially for the characters who have experienced both to such a degree, but it is natural.
but it's kind of like just accepting that it's not going to be perfect, and there is that risk, but that you don't have to catastrophize it completely right from the beginning, which is what they all do. Like, no, let's not even get started on this because it's going to blow up. It's going to destroy everybody. It's like, oh, calm down. You just know this person. So I think intimacy is, an interesting like through line throughout the story that I started to, again, look at the same with avoidance of loss. You start to see it and then you lean into it and the collection becomes really cohesive, but it's not necessarily something that you intend to do right from the beginning.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I wish I could remember. A friend of mine sent me something that was quite funny. It was like something about just like an overwhelming devotion to a single person that just takes over your whole life. And they saw it and they're like, this made me think of your collection. Cool. That's kind of funny. But yeah, that's mine. Those are my thoughts.
Does anyone else have any questions?
That's my polite way of inviting you in. Sorry. Okay, so I have two more questions, and they get lighter and lighter. I sort of feel like maybe I'll switch it up and start light and end heavy next time instead of diving into the heavy. So I would like to talk about time. I'm interested in the way that it's constructed in each of your books. Not just, Michelle, your chapters are titled with years, and we don't necessarily get the time chronologically when we enter the chapter. Caitlin, you go back to very important times in history and give us that. And Catherine, as you mentioned with the first story and with a number of stories, we're looking back at a time from the character's place of knowing more than they did back then. So I wanted to talk to you about that, about how time and the passage of it or the era of it plays in your work.
I don't find this a lighter question. Somehow just the technicality of it is like difficult. I wanted to write this. I wanted this to be a book that, like a story that takes place on the night of the final show of the Tragically Hip, and I spent a long time watching that final show over and over and over and crying, getting the moments right so that what was happening was timed with the song. The rest of it is we're passing through phases of Louise's life, which is, constructively, it feels so clunky. It's like we need background before we can get to the thing that you intended to do, this real-time evening, but it definitely, you need to see every phase as she goes and she's developing and things that she's learning or absolutely not learning, and how she gets to a place where, this after all this time, this night will be the thing that pushes her through.
Fine. Okay. Yeah, benevolence is written retrospectively, and I'm not really played with retrospection a great deal in my novel. So I was interested, and it was the only way I could re-enter this much earlier material was to tell it from the perspective of someone who was my age now, looking back. And so that was really crucial to reimagining the story. And Roxanne is told in letters looking back. And so I guess there's retrospection. There's definitely retrospection. They're trying to reconstruct something in order to get someone else to cough up their version of the story, not knowing whether they will or won't. One of the things I love about stories is the way that they make you deal with time differently than a novel, where you do have more time to move around. And the compression of stories, I like the leap of them. I like being able to jump between time, even in a very short 3-page story like Skin. I really aim for that compression, which is also a temporal depression. It may have spatial leaks, but you can do something different with time when you're jamming bits of time up against each other. And in Derecho, the story about the man who falls in love with the wind, I mean, it spans his life. And someone asked me at one point, doesn't this want to be a novel? And I was like, no, absolutely not. Part of what I'm trying to do here is just go into these moments, like these compressed moments, and that, like, that's the art. If I'm going to pull this thing off at all, it's by doing that, not by trying to expand it. So I really feel that the story form was asking me to grapple with time in very different ways than I do as a novelist, and whether the stories were long or short, they were asking me to do that, and that was a wonderful adventure.
Yeah, for a time for a story, like I said, I bounce around, and it's very intuitive. I've never choose where it's going to be, which I know sounds a little bit pretentious, but it's just kind of feeling out the ideas. It feels like trying to remember something, and something will eventually feel right. And I work with the ideas that I have until I find the rest of the ideas. So the example that stands out to me the most is the Islanders, as I had a general idea of following this dynamic between these characters, and I was starting to understand Lydia, who's an aunt who stops her life basically and takes in her infant nephew, and I was starting to figure out Jamie, who's the little boy, who's the nephew, but I didn't really know where they were located, like where their story was going to unfold. So I was doing what I could without having that, and I tried at different places, kind of like, well, I see this sort of vast place, but I don't quite know where that is. But I had this compulsion to explore violence, and I wasn't sure what form that would take. And originally it was, well, maybe they're fleeing a domestic situation, and there's a person who's violent. Maybe there's like a specific place that had like a home that had some kind of violence in it. But the violence just became more and more abstract. And eventually I realized that it was just everywhere. It was in the air, it was in the streets, it was just inescapable. I couldn't flee this violence. And once I had that, I started thinking about the time, where a specific time in a specific place that kind of looked like the place that I had in my mind. I realized it was the 60s and 70s in Ireland during the Troubles. It was like, oh, that's what it is. That's it. And I had it. And the violence is inescapable. And so what ultimately they're going to have to contend with is how violence has manifested in themselves. So they can't flee it. They have to face what it's turning them into or how it's affecting those around them. And then it all just kind of like fell into place. And that's sort of how I figure out where the stories are set. And I definitely had people ask, how do you decide, like, how did it go from 1968 France to, the Troubles in Ireland, and how did it go from that to like Australia in the 40s? I'm like, just sort of does. It just sort of finds its way there. But then as soon as I have that place, it fits so perfectly that it's like, well, couldn't have been anywhere else. Yeah, I was just waiting for you to find your way to me.
I just have, this is definitely a light question. If you want book raffles tickets, you can go back to Kaylee and get some more. I'm going to raffle off a copy of Caitlin, Catherine, and Michelle's book, and Jacob Bren's book, who I had an online conversation with. So my question is, and again, speaking of like serendipitously having things in common, I want to talk about character names, because both Catherine and Michelle have a Rodney and a Constance, which I don't know if you have Rodneys or Constances in your life. I don't know a single Rodney or Constance. And so when there was a Rodney and Constance in both your books, I was like, okay, we must talk about names, how you name your characters, and if their names stick, and if they do or they don't, why?
Rodney came to, my character names usually, I'll grab something out of there and I'll be like, he's kind of like, he's this kind of guy. And so we'll use this for the time being, and I'll change it if he changes. and they almost never do. Rodney, I was conscious with my male characters' names. Rodney needed something vaguely phallic in his name. There's another character named Mitch, and I thought, there's no man named Mitch who's ever lived who hasn't been at some point called a bitch, right?
Yeah.
That's a man who lives with that. He's like, if I hear that,
Yeah.
super sensitive. Constance, it was that. It was like, well, what's she like? She's like a Constance. Like you can feel it. She's perfection. She's kind of Jesus-like. She's kind of perfection. And I was like, all right, she'll be perfection until I find different. And then I never did. And Constance is Constance. Louise came from, the character of Louise came from a facilities manager at a office where I used to work, and she had the strangest relationship with the facilities manager. The two of them used to go around, and they kind of did a routine, but she was referred to as Lou, and I thought that's really good. Like a woman who was at the same time a Louise and a Lou, and I thought I would like my female character to have a masculine and a feminine name. And so Louise, anyway, she started off as that Louise, and then she deviated wildly from that Louise, but her name stuck. Anyway, I used a real person verbatim to start.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's a way to go.
That's funny, the protagonist of my novel in progress is a Louise, so,
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
But my Connie is, I don't think of her in terms of perfection. She also goes by Connie. She has astounding headaches. And so maybe there's constancy in her relationship to pain. Maybe I was playing along those lines. I named her a long time ago, so I can't really remember, but I think probably has something to do with that. Rodney is like a gay filmmaker, a big bear of a man in a leather jacket. So very different than your Rodney. And I think I come to names a lot through sound and rhythm, and they have to sound right. Hugh in derecho took me a long time to find his name, but there's something Hugh that has to do with the wind in his name, I think, and so I think that's how I landed on that. So it's intuitive and oral, and sometimes they change and sometimes they don't at all.
I feel the same way where it has to feel right. And like I said about memory before, to me, it's trying, like if you trying to remember somebody from your past, you're like, what was that person's name? What's that person's name? And then when you get it, you're like, that's right. And so that's how I know a character's name is right, because I feel like I'm trying to remember it. And then when I finally do quote unquote remember it, I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. That's the person. And it never changes unless it has to. Mm-hmm. Unless there's something, like if you are really set on a name and then you meet somebody and you really don't like them. I haven't had that happen, but like something like that where I'm like, if I had to be pushed out of the name, and I think that happened once where, I can't remember. I think it was just that I read a book and they had the name in it, and then I couldn't get that character out of my head or something like that, like a long time ago. And I'm like, well, I'm going to change it, but I'm going to find something that has the same feeling to it, so I don't lose that. But once I have it, it's like it's pretty set. It's very intuitive, and then I really don't like not knowing their name. Right. When I'm trying to figure out a character. Yeah. It's because then it just feels like it's too, I don't know, like you haven't remembered the person yet. Like I have to remember their name before I can move past this. Mm-hmm. And not always, but like sometimes it just comes immediately. Like the Elizabeth character, Betsy in the Lyrebird spell, was the first thing that came to me for that story, and she came fully formed. Yeah, I didn't have to figure out anything. I just was washing the dishes, and there she was. It was like a little kid sitting next to me, and I'm like, "Hello, Elizabeth Clark. I know everything about you, and I'm obsessed with you. I'm going to spend the next 5 years of my life and figuring you out."
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
I am so grateful for you indulging my questions. They are always mostly selfish and just questions that I want answers to. And I just pray that everyone else finds more about the books and that entice you to buy them. So I'm very grateful. We're going to have moments where you can go and buy the book and get them signed and talk to the authors. I'm not going to pick up the microphone again after this because I always forget. We're back here November 2nd with Heather Burrell, Sado Marcon, and Terry Vlasopoulos. I'm online November 23rd with Shani Mutu, and don't forget about the first 30 writerly conversations I have on Instagram Live. I am privileged to be able to talk to Carrie Ann McGugan, John Cullen, and Paul Vermeersch in October, November, and December. And I'm going to do the book raffle.
Julie.
Me?
Yeah. There you go. You want everything? Free book from today and take a run. Dry Your Tears to Affect Your Aim. Honestly, it's just an incredible book for writers, for anyone to read.
Here we go.
I'm really excited because I have only read one of those books.
Which one?
It's not mine. Excellent. That's it. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone again for joining us online. It's so much appreciated. And please, Jess is there if you want to buy books, English and signed, and chat with Michelle, Catherine, and Caitlin for a few minutes. Thank you.
Thank you.